Bitter and unimaginable. That is the terminology being used today by senior officials from the Iranian regime in talking about what they're going to do next after after Israel had attacked Iran over the weekend. And of course, that's just been the latest of the tit for tat shots that have been going on really since April of this past year. And a lot of people have been wondering where this was going to go next. After the Israelis fired their salvo over the weekend, it seemed like, well, it wasn't that big of a deal, so maybe that was going to cap it off. Well, according to what's been said in the last couple of days and today, the released doesn't look like that's going to quite be the case. And to try to make sense out of what's going on and some of these conflicting claims we have Larry Johnson back with us today, former CIA director, the lead author at sonar21.com, and just all around a great guy. Larry, welcome back to the show.
You are kind and generous with your words. Thank you, sir.
Just being an analyst, just calling it like it is. You know what? I want to go in first of all, before we get into why this official said bitter and unimaginable, because it almost in some sense seems to come kind of out of nowhere, because things seem to be calming down a little bit out. And I want to look at, first of all, I know this is some of the things you've been writing on at sonar21.com about what actually was hit, because if you listen to the Israelis, everything they hit was attacked. They said there were 20 targets that were serviced by 100 different planes. And they took out what they claimed was missile factories, air defense radars, and sent a clear message to the Iranian regime that they could do a whole lot worse if they wanted to. But first of all, just let me ask, what do you make of these claims, and what do you think actually what was the damage?
Spin doctors, very minimal damage. Look, you know from your own experience that if you're going into an area where they do have air defense, the very first task of an aerial attack is SEAD, suppress enemy air defense, right? Because you got to go in and destroy it, suppress it, take it out, so that in your follow-on attack, you can actually have some chance of hitting the targets that you really want to go after. Well, Israel can show a few clips where they did hit a few systems, but they were old systems. But then they kind of say, oh yeah, we took out every single one. Well, no, they didn't. It's a lie. It's just a bald-faced lie.
And I've also noticed they haven't provided any evidence of this other than statements so far. And when they've taken out stuff in whether it's Beirut, southern Lebanon, or anywhere in the Gaza Strip, it's always accompanied by a copious amounts of actual video coverage. And I haven't seen anything so far. How about you?
No, in fact, the only video I observed that night as the attack was unfolding, it was just like when Iran attacked Israel on October 1st. And you had the video outside of Nevatim. Man, you saw it looked like a hailstorm of missiles coming in and hitting targets. Explosions on the ground, not in the air. You saw a couple get intercepted. Well, here's the film that comes out of Iran, and you see all these Israeli missiles coming in, and they're getting picked off. Boom, 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 exploding in the sky. So it's clear to me that the Russian air defense systems, the Russians' assistance to the Israelis was very important. Not a single Israeli aircraft penetrated Iranian airspace. Why? Because they had not suppressed enemy air defenses. They were trying to get them suppressed, and they failed. And you can tell it was a failure. All you got to do is look at the picture that the Israeli government released showing Bibi Netanyahu sitting there at the head of the table and the defense minister Gallant to his side. Those were not the faces of guys seeing their winning football team.
And by the way, let me interrupt you here. So this video Gary's showing, you're about to see these 5 missiles or something come, and all of a sudden you see, and nothing further. And to your point, what I don't see in this or any other, and now maybe I've missed one, but I don't see a bunch of explosions on the ground from any of these.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and this was, this is the power of social media, because in the past, governments could control access, but now that everybody's got their own personal satellite studio in their hand. They can take pictures, upload it immediately to the internet, video and still images. It's real tough to control that unless you just turn off the entire internet, which neither Israel has done nor Iran. Both are intact. In fact, there were several videos of Iranians getting up on the rooftops, looking around, said, "Where's it at? Where's it at?" Nothing.
Yeah, and in fact, actually my next door neighbor, family fled Iran quite a number of years ago, but one of their relatives still has family in the area and went back and was there during the time. And they said that they heard a few of those boom, boom, booms, whatever, but they said that they saw nothing at all outside of that. They didn't see a bunch of any other explosions, and they said everybody in the capital was kind of like, "Wait, that's it? That's all they did?" So if there was supposed to be a message sent, doesn't seem like it was the right one that got across.
Well, yeah, this is the one I think it's trouble for Israel, because over the last 75 years, Israel has relied on the myth of its military invincibility, relied on the myth that it is the best military in the area, if not one of the top ones in the world. Now, I think that's ridiculous, but they've parlayed that, and in the past they've been able to say, well, we beat Egypt, we beat Jordan, we beat Syria, and now, we failed to beat Iran. In fact, Iran beat back an Israeli attack, and Iran in turn showed that it can launch a massive missile drone and ballistic missile attack on Israel, and it can penetrate Israel's air defenses, whereas Israel, despite its claims to the contrary, did not. And, the Wall Street Journal's putting out stories. They're lying. I mean, they're absolutely lying because, as you pointed out, they've never had a problem in the past trotting out the evidence. And remember, after the Iranian attack on October 1st, they said, they didn't hit a thing. Well, it took a few days, but finally satellite images emerged of Nevatim Air Base. And in fact, as you had Ted Postal on your program laying it out. They actually did hit targets. Now, it was not massive destruction, but I don't think that was Iran's intent at the time. They were sending Israel a message, we can penetrate your air defense. Well, here was Israel trying to send its message because they had multiple waves planned. This first wave went out, was to suppress the air defense. The next wave was going to actually go in and hit some targets and cause significant damage. And thank God it didn't happen. Because if it had happened like that, then Iran would have been, wouldn't have any out for, they would have had to retaliate and retaliate massively. And then at that point, we're off into an escalatory spiral that God knows where that would end.
Yeah, and as we're going to see here in a minute, we're not out of the woods yet. But before I get into that, I want to ask what is your best guess on why we saw from October the 1st, the night of October the 1st, all the way through up by Yoav Gallant, just like 2 days, I think, before this happened, these really strong, boisterous claims of that they were going to go and hit something hard. It was going to be painful. It was going to be lethal and all of this stuff. And yet that's not what we saw. Why do you think the difference between what they said and what they actually did?
Well, because they're good at talking, but they're not good at executing. Remember, they were going to wipe out Hamas. And where are we 14 months later? Hamas is still fighting. The notion that Israel with its army cannot suppress an insurgent force in a very confined, boundaried area like the Gaza Strip, and yet we're led to believe they can take on Iran. It's a joke. Yeah,
well, they take on Iran at the same time they're still fighting the Houthis in Yemen and militias in Iraq and in Syria, and of course, obviously, in the West Bank, Gaza, and by the way, that little kind of major war in southern Lebanon.
Right.
So it seems kind of strange to me. But the narrative in the West is that, well, apparently, finally, American diplomacy worked, and they did knuckle down Israel. and got them to back down from the big hit. So they didn't go after nuclear sites. They didn't go after energy sites. So that part appears to be accurate.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Was it because, and there's competing ideas out here. One is that it's not the former, that's what finally American diplomacy got them to back down from, so it wouldn't cause an escalation thing. But the second one is that they realized internally, oh crap, all that stuff I just mentioned, man, there's the Yemenis, there's the Hamas, there's Hezbollah, there's all these other guys. We can't take on another full-on deal if they attack right now. We better just cool the jets on that. So let's try to focus on here. Which do you see as being the more likely?
Well, I think there was an enormous amount of diplomatic pressure, not so much from the United States, but from Russia and China, that Israel in particular needs to pay some attention to Russia, for the simple fact that you've got between 1.5 and 2 million Russian citizens who are also citizens of Israel. So, you talk about dual citizenship and divided loyalties. So I think that there was some very stern warnings given behind the scenes. Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily Israel paid attention to them, but we did see that they delayed. And then there was the intelligence leak that highlighted that they were making these preparations for the air-launched ballistic missiles.
And by the way, as far as I can tell, what was in that intelligence leak is pretty much what they did.
Yeah, in terms of the types of aircraft that were involved, in terms of the type of munitions that were involved. The intelligence that was leaked, said really nothing about the timing,
targets,
or the targets, et cetera. So, but Israel is still confronted with. They keep telling themselves, "Oh yeah, we destroyed all the air defense systems." Well, it's like they've also been telling themselves they destroyed all of Hezbollah, most of Hezbollah's missiles. And guess what? The Israelis are still spending about every other day in a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv and Haifa because of those missiles that they've destroyed are still hitting them coming in and out of southern Lebanon. And this is where it gets really interesting, Danny, that Israel's not in a position that they can fight a war of attrition. They've never fought one.
That's a big point.
And we're not just talking their ability to sustain personnel in the field. We're talking about their economy, because their economy is so dependent, was heavily dependent on tourism. Man, that's gone in the toilet. They've got over 1 million Israelis who have fled Israel because they don't want to live with this kind of threat. At least 80,000 are out of the northern part of Israel because they can't go back. And just on Sunday, Hezbollah issued a more extensive warning that 25 of these settlements need to evacuate because they are now targets. Because up to this point, Hezbollah has been largely focused on targeting military installations. Now they're going to extend it to civilian targets. So, this decapitation strategy, remember 4 weeks ago where the Israelis, they're dancing the horror, yay, we killed Hassan Nasrallah, yay, we set off the pagers, we blew up their leadership, man, we've decapitated Hezbollah, they're done. Now, they're killing more Israeli soldiers in Lebanon per day than died in Gaza, and that's because they're up against an actual combat-hardened veterans. These guys know how to fight, they know how to use cover, they know how to use concealment, they know how to lay ambushes, and the terrain favors
the defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, here's one of the interesting points. So up to now, we've kind of established that Israel's not as strong as they thought they were. They're not as strong as they've been claiming that they were. So there is some vulnerabilities already starting to emerge. And you've just hit on a couple of them, that their Air Force is this invulnerable thing that can do whatever it wants as thought. And their ground forces are now running up into reality, finally, in the southern Lebanon, especially, not to mention the Gaza Strip. But that doesn't seem to really get in the way of a lot of people still saying, no, I think that we should go after everything. Now, here was a question on Fox News by a General Spalding, an American retired general. And they were saying, hey, after all of this stuff has happened here, what is our strategy? Watch this exchange.
we know that we need to go after those nuclear sites. We know that Israel has to respond, and yet we're restraining the Israelis from going after the nuclear sites in Iran. So I just have to wonder, what is our strategy here, and what are we trying to achieve? Israel is going to strike Iran. We know that. Why would we not take advantage of that?
This just, I guess it, in one sense, it boggles my mind. In the other sense, it's not even a yawn because it's just standard data. But in the light of what had happened, and there is no concept at all of what comes next. You just touched on a second ago. Had they succeeded in getting some of the bigger targets, then Iran's hands would have been tied and there would have been a big retaliation. Yeah. This guy's saying, damn it, why wasn't there a bigger response, with apparently no concept of what that would mean for the region or for our forces?
Well, right. And I mean, I've been involved in the past on military exercises, let's say, dealing with these kinds of scenarios. And all the armchair warriors out there that think it's just a piece of cake, and just like George W. Bush thought we'd be, mission accomplished in Iraq within 20 days, woohoo! It doesn't turn out that way. It's a much more complex, difficult issue. The Iranians, they're not stupid, and they've been paying attention over the years about U.S. aggression, not just Israeli, but U.S. aggression, and have calculated that the United States would attack them in a heartbeat if they could, which is why their facilities have been buried deeply underground, what are called hardened, deeply buried targets, HDBTs. And despite Tom Cruise being able to hit them in his, latest Top Gun movie, the reality is different. They are extremely difficult to get to. And the Iranians have something that's called redundancy. They're not a one-trick pony. And, all of these, this Air Force guy, didn't he pay attention in 2003? The United States, with complete air supremacy over Iraq, did not suppress what was going on the ground at all, to a limited extent. Yeah, you had to send Danny Davis and his boys in with tanks. And even then, that didn't completely quell and quiet the violence. It endured for years.
And by the way, let me just add a little asterisk to that, or a little bit more depth. He's talking about Desert Storm in 1991 at the Battle of 7th Riesling, which is the one I fought on the ground with tanks. It was so interesting and almost never talked about, even at the time, much less anymore. But prior to our going in on the ground in that fight, the Air Force had, I think it was 34 days of nonstop bombing. And in some interviews that I actually did with some of the survivors that we captured after the battle, some POWs, they said that they were hit on average about once every 10 hours, night and day, for 34 straight days. On the day we arrived, this dug-in enemy armor battalion out in the open with no cover, no overhead, anything at all. It's just right out there for anyone to see in the desert. They still had like 80% of their vehicles were still operational. Only 2 of the tanks of this certain battalion that we hit had actually been knocked out. Right, and that is with no air defense at all, zero. And still it only did that after it was all. So until you go in on the ground, air power is a great tool. It's very helpful, but it does not solve anything.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's no disrespect to my Air Force buddies. I mean, one of my dearest friends was he flew gunships in Vietnam and then B-52s. But this has been the Air Force, first the Army Air Corps, and then later the Air Force fantasy since World War II. That all we got to do is just drop them bombs, man. That'll solve the problem. Just if we bomb them enough. And look, Israel's trying to do that in Gaza. They have bombed that place into oblivion. And the Palestinians have all given up, right? They've surrendered, or they've died, they've gone away, and they've turned all that land over to Israel. No, just the opposite. They're still fighting. And there's a talk of the Zionist settlers going in to settle parts of northern Gaza. Good luck with that. You can go with what? Body armor and helmets? Because the notion that you can go in and bulldoze a place and then maybe build something doesn't mean that you've actually pacified it to the point that you're not going to have to live looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes, worrying about whether you're going to get a sniper or a
Well,
bomb
unless they depopulate the place first, like they
right.
are physically in the process of doing in northern Gaza right now. We'll see how far that
Yeah.
goes. But if that continues on, that becomes a realistic possibility. But
Exactly.
and I don't want to get diverted on that at the moment here. This I have not seen anything from Naftali Bennett, former prime minister, after the strikes. I have seen a number of the hardliners in the Israeli government have themselves been very upset that there wasn't a much heavier strike to come. But I want to show you that here. This is the mentality. This has been I think just a few days before the strike here, talking about a 50-year opportunity.
We have the ability to strike the nuclear facilities, to strike the regime itself. I would not waste this opportunity on just symbolic strikes or things that make noise, but actually hit the octopus on its head. I also want to point out something really important. The United States of America is at risk from the Islamic Republic of Iran. American citizens are at risk. Iran has been trying to murder Americans on America's soil for the past several years. And Iran that will have a nuclear weapon will be a threat to the United States of America with ballistic missiles. So this is not a war for Israel. This is a war for the free world. Israel is at the forefront. We are willing to do the job. We do need America to provide us a back.
That was so ironic that he starts off saying, we don't just need to make some noise or have a little one here. We need to take this. And in other interviews, he said a 50-year opportunity to go and get the head of the octopus, et cetera. But I just think it's just so comical. And I want your opinion on, do you think how resonant do you think this message is that, oh my God, Iran is coming after the great America if they get a nuclear weapon? Forget about the Soviet Union. Forget about the Russia with their, whatever it is, 6,000 nuclear warheads. But if Iran gets one, oh my God, it's all over. What do you say to that?
Yeah, the American gift to the world, Alzheimer's disease. We forget the past and our responsibility. The country that attacked the other country first was the United States attacking Iran first. Back in 1953, where my former outfit, the Central Intelligence Agency, working with the Brits, working with oil companies, led a coup to overthrow the elected government of Mossadegh. So that's where it started. And our constant meddling in the internal affairs of other countries led to the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And we keep forgetting, in the early days, even after the Ayatollah Khomeini had taken power and taken American hostages, we were still, through Israel, selling that Islamic government weapons. So, I mean, the Iranians got to look at us. They look at us like a schizophrenic patient, because, man, we've got two different, depends if we're high or low that day, because we've been on both sides of the fence whenever it suits us. And we were instrumental in helping Iraq attack Iran and use chemical weapons against Iranians during the Iran-Iraq War, which we were also supporting that side, because we thought there was nothing better than getting a bunch of Sunni and Shia Muslims killing themselves. So what disgusts me and really I find appalling is that the American public continue to indulge themselves in these myths and fantasies about Iran. They hate us because of our freedom. And Iran, they're intent on destroying the United States. You know what Iran would like? Iran would like the United States just to leave it the hell alone. 20 years ago, when the Mujahideen al-Khalq, a terrorist group that had carried out terrorist attacks inside Iran, the United States decided, they're not a terrorist group anymore. We took them off. Why? So we could provide them training and assistance so they could do what? Carry out terrorist attacks inside Iran. So, our big stand we're against terrorism. No, we're in favor of terrorism whenever it suits us. And we have a track record of having supported terrorists, unfortunately, and I find it shameful.
And, and really kind of to just, unfortunately, expand on beyond that, the Israeli government itself has been really intent on keeping a conflict going, and the current government especially has special motivation. Watch this piece here from Marwan Bishara talk about exactly how he sees it.
In Israel, the military are quite a bunch of bloody people, and we've seen that manifest itself in the genocide of Gaza. The politicians are not only bloody, they're also opportunistic. And for the likes of Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich, and other fascists, the continuation of war is really important for them politically and personally.
But they may want that, but and clearly they are doing that at the moment here. But you said something a minute ago I think is important to examine the tension between their may desire to do this and their physical ability to maintain it over time. You said they can't sustain a long war, and they've already. I think if I'm not mistaken, the longest war they had ever fought prior to this was 34 days during the second Lebanon war in 2006.
Right.
And so now then we're 13 months and just with no end in sight in the one in Gaza. We've now opened up what's can only be a many months long slog into southern Lebanon again. And now then we got this thing going on with Iran. How long can Israel continue this to try just enough to keep the war going, but not enough to stop it?
Yeah, I don't think they could go more than a year. I mean, remember that retired general, the Israeli general, who about 2 months ago, he came out and he said, if Israel continues on this course, and this was his prediction, not mine, he said Israel as a nation could dissolve within a year. And he wasn't just being hyperbolic. I mean, he was taking, I think, a pretty level-headed assessment of the fact that Israel is a small country, 6-7 million people. It doesn't have unlimited military resources. It's entirely dependent on the United States and the U.S. support. Now, they may be calculating that if they'll be better off if Donald Trump's president than Kamala Harris, but all of that assumes that the United States economic situation and military situation remains in good shape as well. Because if there's a change on that front, then Israel's extremely vulnerable. The thing, and I think when you had your conversation with Chaz Freeman last, that this is a point he's wisely made, that Israel in the course of the last now 14 months is eviscerated and alienated supporters. And so other countries that at one time could be counted as being in Israel's side, or at least willing to back it, are now saying no more. And Israel is doubling down on that with their Knesset today, at least considering bills to ban UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Workers Agency, from doing anything and being allowed anywhere near Israel. And Israel continues with this bogus claim that they're all terrorists, which they're not. But once they do that, and then they banned the head of the UN, Guterres, next stop, the UN is probably going to turn around and throw Israel out. And the United States says, if you do that, we're not going to fund you. Which again plays into this theme that's come out of BRICS. The rest of the world is sick and tired of being threatened by the American dollar. Because nobody wants to live under the threat. You do what I say, or else I'm taking my ball and glove and going home. Nobody wants to play with that kid. And that's exactly what's happening to the United States and Israel. We're in the process of isolating ourselves and weakening. The U.S. is weakening its presence in the international stage. And Israel, completely oblivious to what it's doing, that it's not going to be welcomed anywhere.
Right. Yeah. And it's really, and that also doesn't even pay attention from our own side, and those advocates of that course of action, the underlying, I guess, fragility of our own economic system, because Israel, they would collapse overnight militarily if they didn't have the absolute nonstop support from the United States physically on the ground, right, with all this ammunition. If these plane loads and train and ship loads of stuff were to suddenly stop because we didn't have it, I mean, Israel would be screwed militarily.
Well, it's not.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not just there. I mean, we're buying off the Egyptians we're buying off the Jordanians. So we're helping Israel buy its security as well by bribing its two neighbors. Because if the U.S. money to Egypt and Jordan dries up, all of a sudden you're going to have a real different picture, and whatever Israel could count on in terms of security on its borders disappears.
That is such a true statement. Yeah, that's all of these things basically hang by a thread that they are absolutely predicating their existence on continuing indefinitely. I'm not sure that's a wise thing to do. In the amount of time we have left, I want to shift gears a little bit and look at the other half of this equation, and that is from the Iranian side.
Mm-hmm.
We want to see kind of where things are from their perspective and what may be coming next. Now, I started off this segment by showing you a full screen image of this new Iranian leader today saying that bitter and unimaginable is going to be their response. So they're saying that, okay, you didn't hit very much. And at first it seemed like maybe they might not do that much, but now apparently it's changing. So before I get to that part, though, I want to show you Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute, who was on CNN, talking about some of the dynamics and how it's starting to play out for Iran and where Iran has to make trade-offs in deciding what it's going to do. Watch this.
Former red lines have completely been washed away, and there is a struggle now to establish new ones. From the Iranian perspective, part of the reason why you're seeing a bit of a shift in the public discourse there, which earlier on, as Jim correctly pointed out, tried to downplay this, you're seeing some indications that they're now shifting away from that. Part of the reason for that is because if in this new open season, so to say, it is becoming normalized for Israel to strike Tehran without any significant consequences, then that's a very negative development for the Iranians. That would put Iran in the same situation as Beirut and Damascus, which the Israelis regularly strike without causing any headlines anywhere, at least not in the West. That's not something I think the Iranians will accept. And as a result, you're starting to see an impetus for some form of a response. The challenge they have, of course, is how can they respond without risking a war that they don't want, but that they think the Israelis want?
A couple of things I think is really important there is that he pointed out that the Iranians don't want war, and everything that they've been doing so far shows that they don't want it, but they're getting close to getting to a point to where they feel like we're in a no-win situation where we can't maintain the status quo because it won't maintain the status quo. It'll keep getting worse, but they also don't want to escalate up into a war. How do you see that tension?
Well, yeah, look, I think there's some other things at play that change Iran's perspective on this. Number one, they're coming out of economic isolation through the sanctions that the United States imposed and tried to get enforced through the United Nations by virtue of becoming a member of BRICS. And by virtue of becoming a member of BRICS, they've now, let's say, they got two new big brothers that can back them up. Before they used to have to go out and worry about the neighborhood bully beating the crap out of them, which was the United States. But now all of a sudden they got Russia and China standing behind them. The U.S. is not eager to get into that fight. The other dimension here is that it's not that they either have to respond themselves militarily. Is look, they got two wonderful proxies. They can use the Houthis and or Hezbollah, among others, as well as the Iraqi Shia groups that are operating in Iraq to carry out attacks against both Israeli and U.S. targets, at least U.S. targets to the extent that they have been involved with supporting Israel's efforts. I mean, Israel's got its hands full. They cannot stop rockets coming in every day and missiles from southern Lebanon. And yet, they're, like I said, they're taking the victory dance that they wiped out Iran's air defense. Again, they can lie. They feed it to a gullible public. Gullible public accepts it, but it doesn't change the reality actually of what's happening on the ground, which means Iran has options. Plus, I suspect the Russians and the Chinese are probably also advising Iran, hey, we agree, you don't have to take these punches, and you have a right to respond, but respond smartly. And that's the one thing you've noticed, that the Iranians, they don't get real emotional. They're not out crying and screaming and then throwing a punch in anger, because we've already seen two two responses to prior Israeli provocations. The first response in April and then the one on October 1st. So I think Iran recognizes it doesn't want to take any action that's going to derail its growing economic integration with BRICS countries, because they're looking at this more long term, because also they've demonstrated, despite all of Israel's claims, have Israel come back, have them try it again, because they'll get beat. And we didn't even really discuss probably the importance of electronic warfare, or the role that may have played as well in defeating the Israeli threat.
So let me look now at so that was Trita Parsi from the outside, kind of saying how he thinks that they're trying to figure this out. Here's an interesting comment from the Ayatollah himself characterizing this. And before I play this, I want to point out here, I think kind of as a sidebar, so to speak, aside from what he's going to say here, the information domain is in many ways more important than the physical domain, though that still predominates because it's a physical destruction, etc. But when you look at some of the, well, let me look over first of all to like the Russia-China side or whatever. You see that Putin making a lot of effort in its war with the Taiwan, sorry, slip of the tongue, with Ukraine. That he presents himself as someone who's very calm. He doesn't come off as a hothead. He sounds reasonable, especially to an international audience, not the West, of course. Xi Jinping is always very under control, etc. Whereas you see a lot of ours, like this general I showed a minute ago, and or General Hodges and certainly John Bolton. Bolton a little bit less so bombastically, but he's very articulate in his negative comments. Watch this piece here by the Ayatollah and look how, at least to an international audience, the way he's coming across, he seems like a reasonable person.
2 nights ago, they carried out a malicious act. They, of course, exaggerated, which is wrong. But at the same time, it shouldn't be downplayed, either by saying it was insignificant or unimportant. The Zionist regime miscalculations must be stopped. They are making serious mistakes in judgment. They do not understand the Iranian people. They have not recognized the strength, capability, creativity, and determination of the Iranian nation. They must be made to understand these realities, and it's up to the country's authorities to determine the appropriate response that best serves the interest of the nation and the country.
So before I get into the substance of what he said, because there's one thing in there I think that it stood out to me anyway. How do you view the impact, even in the West, of his delivery and the way he's coming off? Because we haven't seen the Ayatollah make these comments as frequently as he's been doing here in the last month or two.
Yeah, he breaks our stereotype. We have this image cultivated by Hollywood of these wild-eyed, crazed Muslims ululating at the top of their voice and saying all sorts of crazy, irrational things. It'd be fun to juxtapose one of Joe Biden's speeches with the Ayatollah there. They're both about the same age. Maybe the Ayatollah's a little older. Who does the screaming? Who has the wild, crazy look in his eyes? It ain't the Ayatollah. It's crazy Joe Biden. I mean, we can come up with one after, or his face is distorted and he's yelling at the top of his voice and then he's whispering. He comes across as irrational. And, here's this Iranian guy, older guy, but he's talking in a very logical fashion. He says, hey, we don't want to, the Israelis are clearly exaggerating, but we don't want to pretend that it was nothing. We were attacked. We can't ignore that. But I would suggest Iran's got other options. And I forgot to mention the fact, for the last 5 years, they've had annual military exercises with Russia and with China. So Iran is in the business right now of reintegrating itself with the global South. And most of the global South seems willing to reintegrate with Iran after what has really been, at least a decade of isolation.
Now let's try and interpret a little bit about one of the things that he said in there. And Gary, if you can get a chance, if you can bring that headline back up about the bitter and unimaginable again, because that was said this morning. The Ayatollah's comments were from yesterday, and the thing he said in there that kind of got my attention, and especially in light of what this official was quoted as saying today, is he said that he said we're going to have to figure out what to do, but he said he said Israel must be made to understand that they can't do this. And so the question is, what you were alluding to, what are the ways that they can do this without triggering a war?
Apart from using Hezbollah or the Houthis as a proxy, nothing. If Iran retaliates directly, says they decide, okay, this time we're going to destroy the Nevatim Air Force Base, or this time we're going to destroy this particular air defense, anything that they do that's going to be a visible destruction of property or personnel in Israel will provoke the Israelis to try to retaliate. But I think they realize Israel at this point, its option's nuclear, because their conventional weaponry won't work. And that's one of the lessons I think Israel's quietly behind the scenes taking into account. And there are reports that have emerged over the last 24 hours of a growing rift between the defense minister Yoav Gallant and Bibi Netanyahu, where Gallant even is alleged to have said, hey, we've got to start withdrawing forces from southern Lebanon. This ain't working. As well as we need to be, we're going to have to make some painful concessions. Again, words attributed to Gallant, but I haven't been able to independently confirm them. But if true, then that shows you that this is not one big happy family, because if Israel had carried off the kind of successful raid that they claimed that they did, you wouldn't see Gallant talking like this. He'd be pounding on the table going, yeah, baby, we did it. No, they didn't do it.
Now, let me ask you something. You brought up the specter of the potential use of an Israeli nuclear weapon if they felt like they were getting hit too hard. That is one of the dynamics that I think could well be playing into why we haven't seen any use, whether it's these alleged 150,000, however many still are remaining from the Hezbollah arsenal, that could easily, according to what Ted Postal said, MIT professor on our show a couple of times, he said that if they wanted to, they could saturate this, and especially Iran and Hezbollah together could just absolutely obliterate much of Israel, or at least devastated it to a significant degree, because all of the systems, to include our THAAD, wouldn't be able to come near to stop the number of projectiles that come in. But the belief is that could then spawn the use of a nuclear weapon in back. People examine that part, but let's take it out one level further here. Like you said a second ago, there's also China nuclear powered and Russia nuclear powered that also have a vested interest in this not going in. What is the risk for Israel if they were to use a nuclear weapon on Iran?
Well, one, there's not one strategic node in Iran that if you hit that node, that the whole place crumbles, falls apart. Sorry, it's a complex system, and it's multiple nodes of power and economic activity and military activity. So dropping one nuke, dropping two nukes, dropping three nukes, all that guarantees is now Israel has created a nuclear threat, not just to Iran, but to the neighboring countries for the possible spread of fallout. And then at that point, we'll have it will face a united response from the likes of Russia and China. And frankly, I don't think the United States would be able to countenance that. Now, there'd be some who say, oh, yeah, thank God they did. But when the smoke clears, Americans have been spoiled by too many of these Hollywood movies where they have a big explosion at the end and it solves everything. This isn't Slim Pickens riding the nuclear warhead down in Dr. Strangelove. Okay, the bomb goes off, and then there's the day after, and the day after, there's still people there. There's still a country intact, and all of a sudden now they're mad. And it goes back to your point that even if Iran doesn't have a nuke, Iran has sufficient conventional weaponry that it can, as you said, it can destroy Israel. Israel's a small place compared to Iran. Iran's vast. It's very large. And the problem for Israel is it doesn't have enough planes. It doesn't have enough missiles to cover all. Neither does the United States. I mean, let's be honest about that too.
Yeah.
We'd be hard pressed to carry out and conduct a sustained attack against Iran, particularly without suppressing their air defenses.
Now, let me ask you, in the last bit of time we have here, let me kind of zoom out from here and pivot over to the Russia-Ukraine war, but in a way that remains connected here. What, in your estimation, would be the fallout in the Russia-Ukraine war if this situation here does eventually explode into an all-out region war, and then it's Iran, Israel, and the United States either is involved or it has to start giving massive amounts of support to Israel?
Yeah, well, then Ukraine's totally screwed because they're in the same position as Israel as far as being dependent upon the United States and Western Europe. Western Europe's great at promising support. Oh yeah, we're with you 110%. But when it comes down to actually writing the check and providing the aid or producing the weapons, they go, "Oops, can I give you a check, but you promise not to cash it till next week?" That's Europe. So Ukraine would immediately find itself bereft, frankly, of support, because then the Patriot missiles are going to go to Israel, not Ukraine. HIMARS, Israel, not Ukraine. I mean, the United States is already providing, was it now up to 3 THAADs? And why do you think that is? Because, think about this for a minute. If Israel's response in shutting down the Iranian attack on October 1st was so great, so fantastic, so effective, then why in God's name do they need 3 new THAAD systems to provide air defense? Because their system works so well? Or maybe their system didn't work and they realized we got a problem and we need something extra. I argue it's the latter.
Yeah, pretty sure that's the case there. We've seen all the physical evidence you referenced earlier, even with your own eyes. You can see it without anybody telling you what happened. You see the missiles found their targets.
Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly see what happens here. I don't think that there's anything imminent in the, like there was like right after October 1st, where it seemed like something new was going to come quickly. I think the Iranians, as you mentioned earlier, are probably going to be taking their time and thinking things through before they do anything. But if the Iran's been what they have been, something will come at some point from someplace. So I guess we'll have to keep an eye on that. Yeah,
just look at the social media. Monitor the social media in both Israel and in Iran. The Iranians are not boiling over with anger. You're not seeing the kinds of expressions of outrage that you did in the aftermath of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran during the inauguration of President Pezeshkian. You didn't see the kind of outrage and anger after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. You're actually seeing some pretty humorous stuff circulating, making fun of the Israelis. And, a couple pointing out saying, hey, in our New Year's celebration, we got more fireworks than that, that kind of thing. Man. So I'm just, it's not a perfect indicator, but it does give you some sense of which way the wind is blowing. And in this case, while the Ayatollah Khamenei is certainly saying, hey, we take this seriously and we're going to respond, they're not under pressure saying you got to hit back now and you got to show those Israelis, because the Russians are telling them, you already showed them something. You showed them that they can't, they can barely lay a glove on you. We'll see what happens. But I wish in the world that we could get to a situation to where we could get all this shut down. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Thanks for coming on today, Larry, as always. And as we always remind everybody, go to sonar21.com
because I know we only have Larry on about once a week or so, and I know it's not enough for a lot of you. So go there and you can get all the Larry that you can find. Lots of stuff posted on that website. A lot of good information. So appreciate you coming on again today, Larry.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
And we will see you guys on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't already. And by the way, also make people aware that we are now on podcasting, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, wherever you get your podcasts. Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Type that in there and you will find us on your favorite podcast outlet. Thank you very much. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.